Hello, and thank you for joining Real Story Group's webinar today on the new Omnichannel stack. My name is Scott Dill. I'm on the business development team here with Real Story Group, and our founder and CEO, Tony Byrne, will be joining us momentarily to take us through the heart of today's presentation. As we get started, I did want to mention a couple quick housekeeping items of note. You may have seen on the initial invites that the webinar was scheduled for an hour, but good news, I guess, if you want to have some lunch, we'll only be going for 30 minutes today, so that should free up the second half of the hour for you. And as we're going through today's session, you're welcome to ask questions in the questions tab in the GoToWebinar control panel, and we'll get to those at the end of today's session as time permits. If not, we'll certainly reach out to you post-webinar. Also want to let you know that for our subscribers online, we thank you for joining us, and you'll be getting access to a recording of today's session. And for everyone on the line, you'll be receiving the slides from today's presentation over the next couple of days from our marketing team. So thanks for taking some time out of your day to join us. It's an exciting topic for us. And from here, I'll send things over to Tony Byrne. Tony?
Yeah, hey, thanks, Scott. Great to be with you folks today. It's such a fascinating topic. We're at a real elbow in time here as we transition from the 2010s to the 2020s, and we've got some pretty strong ideas around what a kind of new omnichannel stack should look like for the next decade, and that's what I'm going to share with you over the next 30 minutes or so. A little bit of background about Real Story Group. I founded the company about 18 years ago, really because of that quadrant that you see on the left. I was working for a systems integration firm. We were implementing some tools that were in the top right-hand quadrant of major analyst firms. Discovered there were a lot of problems with these tools, often a lot of technical debt that went hidden. And I thought there's got to be a better way to tell the real story about how these tools work or don't work. So I founded CMS Watch, now Real Story Group, and our mission in life is to do really hard-hitting, deep, critical evaluations of these vendors across these landscapes. And we figured out right away that to do that properly, to do really critical evaluations, we had to be completely independent and really redefine independence for the analyst world. So as you can see on the right, we don't consult with vendors, we don't speak at their events, we don't accept any expenses or hospitality, we don't write white papers for them, you'll never see us quoted in their press releases. We only work for you, the enterprise customer, and that really gives us the freedom to be deeply critical about what's going on out there so that you can have the best, most independent and hardest hitting judgment about which vendors might be a better fit for you or not. So over the years, we expanded from just covering web content management to a number of different technologies. Every year, we put the vendors that we cover on a map, which is cartographically kind of challenging, but always interesting. You can download this map from our website at realstorygroup.com/vendor map. And so we organize the vendors according to different lines based on the solutions they sell. Of course, that doesn't mean that a vendor having multiple solutions is necessarily a better fit. In fact, it's often a worse fit. So we're not making a value judgment here. We're just trying to kind of describe these landscapes. And so you can see in the key on the left that we've covered web content management, digital asset management, marketing automation, and CRM for a long time. What's interesting is over the past couple of years, adding the 4 lines that you see towards the bottom, the orange line around customer data platforms, the kind of mauve line around journey orchestration engines, green for operations hubs, and then red line for this emerging, what we're calling omnichannel content platforms. And we'll have a lot to say about that today because those are some foundational capabilities that are really important if you're trying to build a truly omnichannel stack. So what do we mean by that? Well, I think for the last decade, we've been working towards what I might call a traditional DX or MarTech stack. And so this is a reference model, that we've been using for a good part of the last decade, where, of course, you have major channels at the top, got some production, interaction, delivery services in gray. then some content and engagement management services that you see in the colors, all ideally living on top of some customer data backbone, or you're getting access to core, customer data through some sort of APIs. And so, a lot of us have been working feverishly over the last 10 years or so to sort of modernize this environment and really build a lot of complexity and a lot of sophistication into our marketing automation, web content management, digital asset management, certainly social engagement, and have made oftentimes significant investments both in technology and people and skills and so forth. But I think that as we reach the end of this decade, this particular model is kind of dead-ended, and it's dead-ended for some very specific reasons. If we're going to look at this challenge of engaging customers and prospects in an omni-channel way, or I would say a more customer-centric way as opposed to an enterprise-centric way, then this traditional MarTech DX stack is just too siloed. So, if you start in the lower left, the issues that we're having is that data is getting stuck in a variety of different back office repositories, and it's inconsistent, not accessible, not actionable. Then we have all these content experiences and rules that are really platform specific. So we might have specific personalization rules in our marketing automation or email service provider platform that are very different than the personalization rules that we have on our web content management platform. And so how do we align those things? And the point-to-point integration is just simply doesn't scale. And what happens then is the delivery logic gets trapped in individual delivery channels. And what happens is your customers and prospects don't enjoy an integrated, consistent experience. And so we identified over on the right-hand column a series of symptoms that you're probably experiencing yourself. Certainly, we've seen this across our subscriber base of mostly large enterprises, organizations really struggling with some of these problems. And in particular, I think some challenges around aligning service and support as well, and trying to integrate those customer touch points into the broader customer experience, and not just thinking about, just how we're going to email message and text message to our customers. So what's interesting is kind of what's the response to this. And traditional analyst firms, I think, are really telling you to double down on the 2010s. That's the only way I can describe it, is that both Forrester and Gartner have come up with this concept of a digital experience platform, or a DXP, which is a single large vendor like Oracle, IBM, Adobe, Salesforce, SAP, that nominally is going to sell you a number of different things, and the vendors get rated by how many different things they can sell you. This is absurd. And is, in fact, I would argue, a complete abomination and potential the career killer for you. Is that no single vendor is going to give you an omni-channel stack. You can create an omni-channel stack yourself out of the right set of services, but you can't actually buy omni-channel from a single vendor. And what's worse, you really want to rethink whether you want to be investing so much at the digital experience layer. It's not that digital experience doesn't matter. Of course, it matters a lot. But what happens is that if you end up jamming a lot of functionality and richness and content and data and decisioning at the forward end, then it stops becoming omni-channel. And if you're going to become customer-centric, then you have to be omni-channel. So there's got to be a different way of doing this. And just as a caution, never be this guy. Right? Like, yeah, okay, so you may get CRM and Salesforce automation, maybe customer service platform from Salesforce, but don't just align then with Salesforce for all of your other digital experience needs, because it's obviously going to be a mixed bag of solutions. You have to really build your own stack. And so what we've done is come up with what we describe as the omnichannel technology stack for the next decade. And so, yes, you still have different engagement channels. You still have interaction delivery services underneath. You still have content and engagement management services. That's in the kind of middle band here, service and support, CRM, social engagement, email marketing automation, WCM, so forth. But what we have here is really critical components of the stack is what we call enterprise foundation services. And these are services that span across channels, across systems. And they're really designed to bring much more coherence to your customer experience. So if you start at the bottom, customer identity and access management and single sign-on, We know a lot of you have been working on this over the last decade. Hopefully you have most of this problem solved. If you haven't, we would argue it's a very high priority for you. And going up into the blue zone here, intelligence hubs. We know a number of you are investing heavily both in kind of front-end customer analytics as well as deeper enterprise data science. All of that's really important in terms of closing the loop on analytics, providing strong reporting, obviously predictive modeling, which is really critical for being then to be able to act on what's the appropriate next action across various customer touch points. But then there's this middle area here, operations hubs, journey orchestration, omnichannel content platforms, and then any orange customer data platforms. Let's spend a little bit of time on those because this is really the area where we're predicting you're going to be wanting to invest substantially more going forward. So let's start with operations hubs. These allow you as a team to work across departments to collaborate, create, and schedule both internally with your internal stakeholders as well as externally, so that your web team knows what the cadence and schedule of some of the email messaging. Your customer service team may have input into different things that are going on. It's a way of really allowing you to coordinate and collaborate operationally across different silos. Then you have journey orchestration and decisioning. So this is listening, mapping, measuring, and then acting on omni-channel journeys. So this is where personalization is going. This is clearly where you're going to have set your core rules. Then customer data platform technologies. This is unified customer and prospect data mart, where you have all of the relevant information that your frontline CX specialists and systems need to be able to leverage highly personalized experiences. And then finally, this is really an emerging marketplace, is omnichannel content platforms. So this is kind of a spin-off from the digital asset management market, where you're having various types of content that you're meant to be reused across different channels. So reuse is really the key concept here. And I'll get into that a little bit more when we get there. So let's look at these four in a little bit more detail and context here. So what happens under this model is that you're moving capabilities from individual silos down to enterprise-wide foundation services. And so to be sure, you still have some really important channel-specific things to be doing at the edge, at the actual customer-facing environment. So you're going to contextualize that experience. You may be assembling different things into experience. You're going to be delivering that experience, and you're going to be interacting with customers. But it's at an enterprise-wide level outside of these specific channels is where you're going to have various core components, your core data, your core reusable content, your core insights, where you're going to orchestrate different experiences, where you're going to invoke personalization, where you're going to be able to collaborate across internal units and with external stakeholders, and where all these things are going to be accessible to all of your frontline systems. So roughly speaking, what happens is that these enterprise foundation services become decision makers. And at the customer tier, it becomes more like order takers, right? They're getting content, data, and just-in-time decisioning around what is to be assembled and delivered to the customer. So the good news here is that even though you're investing more heavily lower in your stack, you can potentially invest a little bit more lighter, higher in your stack, which again is kind of the opposite of the way that we've been thinking for the last decade. So there's a real shift here that I'm going to talk about in a minute. But first, let's talk about some of these platforms just to give you a quick tour of those four key platforms. So first is customer data platform. I think a number of you know what these systems do. Here's just a short infographic that we put together. You take a variety of different first-party customer data and potentially second and third-party data, and you put it all into a data mart where you can resolve identities against a single identity. You can do device stitching, obviously data cleaning and enrichment. Really critical work here on relationship graphing and particular segmentation. And you may apply a number of different rules here and have event handling, but the point is that you have a single place where you can go to for the definitive information to then reason against that information as you're going out into the world and engaging with these customers in all of your various frontline platforms, potentially advertising, and then potentially doing some lightweight analytics here. So these aren't necessarily data lakes where you're doing more serious kinds of experimental or predictive data science, but some people do use a CDP to do some more frontline customer-oriented analytics, and certainly can be useful in that context as well. The issue that you face with a number of these tools, because they are somewhat emergent marketplaces, is that you have an almost embarrassment of riches in terms of the choices that are available to you. These are what we call in analyst world, analyst speak, highly fragmented marketplaces. To be sure, the suite vendors are always going to be circling around. They're relatively new entrants to this market and in general tend to have fairly parochial offerings. So you want to be careful not to default to the data management offerings from Adobe, IBM, Oracle, and Salesforce. You're going to typically find more advanced and more focused features among the different pure play vendors, although to be sure, a number of them are smaller, but there's a lot of interesting things happening in this space, including some vertical specialization. It's still an expanding marketplace, so a lot of really interesting players here. You can check out our research. It goes into much more depth about what these systems do and don't do. But specifically, the way that we evaluate CDP technology is the same way we would evaluate any other technology, which is what is the business use case you're trying to solve? And so there's at least 9 business use cases for customer data platforms. You can download a sample of our research and get into this in a little bit more detail. I'm not going to describe all of these here, except to say that as in any marketplace, not all CDP vendors are going to support all use cases or even support them evenly. In fact, typically we'll see a CDP vendor, usually because of its flagship customers that sort of imprint them in a particular direction. They're going to be usually pretty good at 2 or 3 of these. They're going to be okay at 2 or 3 others, and they're going to either do poorly or simply avoid 2 or 3 other use cases. And again, that's not a value judgment. It's just around what is the right fit for you. So you have a lot of choices, but there's also a lot of different use cases here. And we find using our own kind of dynamic quadrant generators that often we can get a subscriber down to a short list of, among those, say, 36 CDP vendors, often we can get them down to a short list of about 6 vendors just based on scenario fit that are going to be the right ones to then go pursue. Other interesting category here is journey orchestration engines. So these are essentially decisioning systems where they get data and events in from point of sale, digital marketing, ads, so on and so forth. You watch and learn initially, do some quantitative journey listening around what's actually happening. Then you can more proactively plan and map these journeys and then activate them by integrating with your actual downstream systems that are actually interacting with customers, and then analyze and optimize those journeys. So not all journey orchestration engines do all 4 of those phases, but this is roughly speaking the universe of potential capabilities or services. Once again, 6 key use cases, business use cases for journey orchestration engines. Some are better at some of these than others, and so it's going to be really important for you to sort of think about, at least initially, what are the key problems we're trying to solve or the key business benefits that we're looking for. Once again, a fragmented marketplace. Once again, suite vendors, MarTech suite vendors have somewhat limited offerings, particularly Adobe, Oracle, Salesforce, and IBM natively tend to want to use their marketing automation platforms, which are useful for orchestrating journeys that are largely messaging driven, but for journeys that are much more omnichannel or not necessarily messaging oriented, not necessarily so great. You have these traditional kind of marketing BPM vendors at the bottom here, which also have some interesting, if somewhat complex solutions as well. And then, of course, pure play vendors. So this is just an example from Oracle. This is actually Responsis, and it's useful if what you're primarily doing is sending email, and that's the primary way that you're interacting with customers. I think hopefully by now all of us realize that email is just one channel, and through a particular customer journey, whether it's around discovery or exploration or usage or cross-selling and sharing, that there's going to be a lot of different touch points with you, and you've got to be able to orchestrate how you want to interact with that customer across all of those touch points and not just email. So that's a particular weakness of some of the larger vendors in particular in this space. Before we move on to the next marketplace, I'll remind you that you can feel free to ask questions or anything you disagree with or anything you want to agree with or share in the GoToWebinar control panel. And we'll have a few minutes at the end to address those. So in the third category is omni-channel content platforms. Again, this is kind of an emergent space. This is not a traditional enterprise term. In fact, we made this, we put this label on this category, so it's not a universally recognized category. Just want to alert you to that. But we think it's an important one that's emerging, where you have like a content object store for base themes and assets. So a good example is, you know, I want to place, if I'm going to do dynamic email messaging, I want a place to store all of these different email components. Where can I do that? My web content management system is probably going to be pretty bad at that. My digital asset management system doesn't really handle text and copy very well. But you may also want a place to store offers, images, video, audio, potentially documents, micro experiences. You're going to want to ingest where used data here, so you can find out where these assets are being used across which channel, so that if you're going to decommission them or change, you can understand how that's all going to work. So this is really for base reusable content, to be able to then push that content across all of these different channels, so that you're not relying on a particular channel itself to do that content management for you. And finally, we'll take a look at omnichannel operations hubs. Really interesting space right now. There's been a lot of tools in these markets for a long time, but also a lot of new emerging players as well. Roughly speaking, it breaks down into 4 categories, and each one of these categories themselves often have subcategories, but you can look at starting with marketing resource management, which has been around for a while, for time and expense tracking, campaign ROI, that sort of thing. Campaign management, or sometimes marketing operations management, where you're doing sort of strategic orchestration and you're having an enterprise calendar, scheduling and tracking sort of what's going on, so people have a dashboard of all of the different campaigns or other initiatives that are underway across channels. Creative operations management, which is sort of the upstream creative process, which is now we know is also becoming a downstream process. So there's a lot of interesting challenges there. And then content operations management, right? And there's overlaps with content marketing, and often then also integrating with freelancers and agencies and so forth. So these are neat boxes, but the reality is that vendors don't always play in neat boxes. And so what we see in this segment is a vendor who might be really good at one of these 4, and that's where they started, but they're kind of doing bits of the others as well. So you have to kind of figure out, okay, what do I really want to focus on? In theory, I could use 4 different tools for this, but what we've been encouraging our enterprise subscribers to think about is really, what are the 2 most important ones for you? And then for the other 2, you might be able to get those as subsidiary services, you know, within one of those other vendors. In other words, you probably don't need 4 vendors for this. If you focus on which 2 are most important to you, you can probably get all 4 capabilities with just 2, max 3 vendors to do this. So that's omni-channel operations hubs. All right, so let's try to put this all together. So if you really care about a truly coherent omni-channel customer-centered experience, then you want to think enterprise-wide and not just departmental, right? You can't just count on the web team, the email campaign team, the customer service team to be able to solve this problem. You're going to need to start building some enterprise foundations underneath those levels. So, you know, I think you can sense some of our enthusiasm about this technology, but also, you know, you want to remain skeptical around some of the vendors here. These are emerging marketplaces, so they tend to be, in many cases, newer vendors, or some of your existing incumbent vendors are taking a new stab at this, and so, or are trying to repurpose some other tool for this capability. So you really want to do your diligence. As we would always recommend, do hands-on testing of 2 finalists before you make a decision. The bigger theme here that I'm going to talk about a little bit more in the next slide is invest low and simplify high. So this is what's really interesting as we turn the corner from the 2010s to the 2020s, is that as you seek to replace over time your email, your web content management, your social engagement, CRM, so forth, maybe you can replace them with simpler, less expensive tools because they're going to be more order takers rather than decision makers. But in any case, just remember that platforms and vendors are not themselves omnichannel. Going all Adobe or all Salesforce or all Oracle is not going to give you an omnichannel stack. We're very deliberately not putting vendor logos here. We're thinking in terms of services, and you're likely to need more enterprise foundation services. You're likely going to need to mix and match among vendors. Your stack can become omnichannel if you build it that way. And again, this opportunity, which is really interesting, around getting simpler at the engagement tier. So we could do this across all the different channels. I'm just going to pick web content management as an interesting example, which is that you have, of course, these big name vendors that have a lot of mind share, Adobe, Acquia, Sitecore. But what's interesting that we've seen is they're really getting pushed by some more mid-market alternatives that might give you 80% of what they do. And that 80% might be more than good enough and could very well be, less than 50% of the cost and the complexity. So this is a really good time to be thinking about simplifying the high end, the sort of customer facing side of your stack, not just building simpler experiences, but also having simpler tools driving those experiences and pushing some of the complexity lower in your stack. This is Stacy, the stack owner. People come to her with a lot of different questions every day. Our mission in life is to put a shield around Stacy and help her answer whatever questions that come up, and really be not just her shield, but her guide to help her make good decisions about her stack. So if you're Stacy or you know Stacy within your enterprise, please put us in touch. We live and work every day to make Stacy successful. And there's various ways that we do that. We have 3 different subscription offerings. One is on the far left, you can just subscribe to a particular research stream, get our decision tools, all the hard-hitting research, access to us on the phone to help you make a good choice. If you're looking for something more broader than that in terms of being able to get ongoing advice around decision-making, around your stack, strategic decisions around your stack, then we have an Omnichannel Stack Advisory, which is sort of an all-you-can-eat thing where you get access to all of our research, and you also get access to our various reference models and ad hoc advice around the decisions in front of you in terms of not just vendor choices, but also broader architectural choices. And as an option off that, we're really excited to be forming what we're calling an Omnichannel Stack Leadership Council. We're going to be meeting 2 to 3 times a year. These are just for large enterprise stack owners to get together and have confidential kind of peer-to-peer oriented support. So really excited about that. First meeting is going to be in September in Boston. Already several of our largest subscribers are going to be joining us there, and looking forward to a lot of really interesting lessons coming out of that. So feel free to, again, if you have any questions or concerns or anything you'd like to share, feel free to use the GoToWebinar questions panel. And then Scott, you can just tell us how people can stay in touch.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tony. We certainly invite you to take a look at any of our research excerpts right on our websites, where you can go to Real Story Group /try and download one or a number of free samples. You're also welcome to reach out to us if you'd like to see a behind-the-scenes tour of the Real Story Group subscriber experience and what exactly would be available to you if you were to work with us from a research and advisory perspective. So please feel free to drop us a line at explore@realstorygroup.com. We're always open to hearing feedback and questions. And I did want to mention that later this month, we'll be hosting our next webinar, June 26th at the same time. And that's when we'll take a look at a more detailed look at the new map that we showed at the beginning of the presentation, and really deep dive into the changes that have been made and the trends that we're seeing in the omni-channel technology marketplace. So certainly invite you all to join us for that. And Tony, did you see any questions come across on your side?
Yeah. We've got one from Alexander here, who's said that, I had mentioned some of the usual suspects, SAP, Salesforce, so forth, but not Microsoft. And so where was Microsoft in all of this? That's a great question. I think Microsoft has been careful here, I think, not to overextend itself at some level. They've, of course, have had the dynamic CRM environment, which also they've built out a number of adjacent pieces to it, including landing page management, some degree of marketing automation. They've been trying to convert that to a more cloud native environment. And along the way, that's kind of distracted them a little bit. They had to sunset their original marketing automation product and just come out with a new one. We evaluate dynamics in both our CRM and our marketing automation streams. But Microsoft has otherwise been somewhat circumspect and to some degree has been trying to push or resell Adobe tooling. I'm not sure that's the best partnership in the world because Adobe tools tend to be at the very highest end of the market and not necessarily a good fit for all of Microsoft's customers. So, Microsoft has been cautious here. I think maybe to some extent to their credit, because they haven't overextended themselves. I think the way maybe that IBM did, and that IBM is largely exiting this marketplace. So I think that in itself was probably a cautionary tale to Microsoft. So we'll see. They've been rumored to be potentially acquiring a marketing automation platform, maybe acquired WCM vendor. They have not pulled the trigger on any of those over the last 12 years. And I think that's they're likely to continue to stick to their knitting. Michael is asking, can we have access to the slide deck? And yes, everyone on the call today will get access to the slide deck in the next 48 hours. If your employer is a Real Story Group subscriber, then you'll also get access to a full recording that you can share with your colleagues. So we're a little bit past the half hour. Thanks for sticking around, and happy to follow up with you on any questions you may have specifically. Feel free to reach out to us at the coordinates here. Otherwise, for Scott Dill and Tony Byrne at Real Story Group, signing off now. See you next time.